Large-scale shootings have triggered new limits on gun ownership and access in numerous countries, and advocates for gun control point to them as proof that mass shooting incidents can be dramatically reduced.
Hey all, I'm John Avlon, and this is Reality Check on the extremist beat. No country in the world loves guns quite like America. We have more guns than people here in the United States. We have a gun culture rooted in our history, our Constitution, and even reflected through the basic reality of where we live. Because, let's face it, people have very different relationship with guns in urban and rural communities. But we also need to face the fact that there's a lot of mythology around guns in America. Fundamental distortions and romanticizations around a tool that could be used for self-defense, hunting, recreation, or mass murder. The data shows that guns are far more likely to be used in homicides here in America than other countries like Britain, Australia, or Canada. Mass shootings have been on the rise here, even as overall crime has declined from its highs in the early 1990s. But 10 of the deadliest mass shootings in American history have taken place in the last 15 years. And there doesn't seem to be any real political will to deal with it. Now, one reason is an increasing expansion of gun rights, with more and more states allowing people without permits to carry a concealed weapon. This is often defended by hearkening back to America's history, a frontier ethos forged in the old Wild West. But reality is often disconnected from romantic fantasies about the past. As this article from Smithsonian Magazine states, the Old West conjures up all sorts of imagery. But broadly, the term is used to evoke life among the crusty prospectors, threadbare gold panners, madams of brothels, and six-shooter packing cowboys in small frontier towns such as Tombstone, Deadwood, Dodge City, or Abilene, to name a few. One other thing these cities had in common? Strict gun control laws. That's right. In many of the classic cowboy towns that are templates for hundreds, if not thousands, of Westerns, visitors were required to disarm. Take a look at this sign from 1873 outside Dodge City, Kansas, identified by UCLA law professor Adam Winkler in his book Gunfight. The sign says, "The carrying of firearms strictly prohibited." It's not exactly John Wayne stuff, is it? Now, actually, my candidate for the greatest American Western, Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven, got it right in this scene where Sheriff Little Bill, played by Gene Hackman, forces a gunslinger dubbed the Duke of Death, played by Richard Harris, to disarm. Take a look.
Well, good afternoon, gentlemen.
I'll have that 32, Bob. Enemies, Bob. You been talking about the Queen again?
Now, of course, all this undercuts the gun culture mythology that gets used to excuse opposition to any gun safety reforms today. So does the fact that the NRA was founded in the 1870s as an organization dedicated to teaching gun safety and marksmanship. The NRA even supported the federal government with the National Firearms Act of 1934, which required registration and placed onerous taxes on weapons like machine guns that, quote, were considered quite severe and adequate to carry out Congress's purpose to discourage or eliminate transactions in these firearms. It's a reminder of how crucial context is and how much our political debates desperately need historic perspective, because it might just make us more reasonable and less absolutist. Joining me to discuss this timely issue is sociologist David Yamane. He's a professor at Wake Forest University who's been studying guns in America for more than a decade, is writing a book on Gun Culture 2.0, and is a member of something called the Liberal Gun Club, dedicated to education, safety, and marksmanship. David, welcome to Reality Check.
Thanks for having me, John.
David, why is America's relationship with guns so different than any other industrialized nation?
Well, I think that we really have to go all the way back through American history to realize that when those first colonists got off of a boat in 1607 in Jamestown, Virginia, that they were well armed as civilians, and that tradition of civilian gun ownership has persisted from that time forward. I think, there's positive and negative aspects of guns throughout American history. And so, the conquest of the continent made guns extremely important. Enforcing slavery made guns extremely important. But also the ability to resist tyranny in the form of the British Crown gave guns a very positive cast within our culture that people can constantly return to when they're looking for the positive side of gun ownership.
I want to specifically get to the myths about the Old West, because that seems to be at the root of a lot of this in our culture. I played that clip from Unforgiven earlier because it does undercut a lot of stereotypes that people still draw on. Cowboys were used to reasonable gun restrictions, put in place in part because there was a lot of drinking in saloons, and guns and booze are a really bad combination, I'm sure we can agree. But we seem to have regressed a bit on this. Why?
Well, it's certainly easier to carry a firearm concealed in public in Tombstone, Arizona today than it was in the 19th century or in Dodge City. And so gun laws have definitely liberalized in that sense, carry laws. But I think we need to also recognize the other side of that coin, which is that we also today have more laws that regulate who is a legal gun owner. So even in a permitless carry state, you have to be able to legally possess a firearm in order to carry that firearm. Those sorts of abilities to check the backgrounds of people didn't exist in the 19th century.
So look, I enjoy recreational gun shooting. If I see an opportunity to take out a couple clays, I'll do it. You do as well. But I think what's different is the mass shootings we're seeing and our apparent inability to come to grips with that, despite the fact that it doesn't happen at this scale or rapidity in any other industrialized nation. And when you have that conversation, you got to go back to the Second Amendment. So let's talk about that. As an expert, how much weight should we put in those crucial first two clauses? A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state.
Well, this is obviously extremely divisive. The Supreme Court has weighed in on this in the Heller decision. This is the current law of the land. But the way I look at it is that people owned firearms for purposes of self-defense prior to the establishment of the country. There are also some states which recognized an individual's right to keep and bear arms for purposes of defense. So I feel like that pre-existing right and also the reality of gun ownership for defensive purposes exists, and for me at least, modifies or moderates that first clause of the Second Amendment. I do believe that people have an individual right to keep and bear arms for purposes of self-defense, although, as the Heller decision also said, not an unlimited right.
And that, I think, is a crucial point. In Scalia's decision in Heller, he makes very clear that there are a history of reasonable restrictions that are entirely constitutional. And somehow that seems to get overlooked.
They're coming for our freedom.
We've seen a lot of guns sold in the past few years in America, tens of millions. And it's often predicated upon a manufactured panic that they're coming to take your guns. So when was the last time the U.S. government actually confiscated guns en masse?
Well, I actually don't know the answer to that question. Do you know?
No, that's why I'm asking you, actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
because it is such a perpetual fear tone that is used by the NRA and by folks to sort of drum up gun sales and ammunition sales. I'm wondering, is there something I'm missing? Is there some precedent for this?
Well, okay, let me say this about that issue. So in the wake of many mass shootings, especially school shootings, people will point to, in England in 1996, there was a school shooting, and the government acted immediately to enact common sense gun controls, which basically meant banning all handguns.
And what were the effects of those gun confiscations, given that obviously it's a totally different constitutional framework?
Well, I think that we definitely don't see the kinds of mass shootings in those countries that we see in the United States. I don't know that they had the history of mass violence that we've had in the United States. So, there could be a net benefit in terms of reducing certain very rare types of shootings in the United States, but at the cost of confiscating the most commonly owned weapons from 75 to 80 million Americans, that may just be something that the American population is not willing to trade off.
When you see elementary school children slaughtered in schools, again, in the case of Uvalde, Texas, in a way that destroys the myth of the good guy with the gun, what do you think we can and should do about it? Or do you think this is the kind of thing that we need to accept as an inevitable byproduct of gun culture in America?
Well, I don't accept that it is an inevitable byproduct of gun culture in America. I think that the overwhelming majority of gun owners are good, sane, and responsible people.
Agree.
And so we really are trying to figure out ways of handling these situations that are quite exceptional. In such an emotionally wrought time, we see people falling back on their pre-written talking points. I think that, less shouting and more talking is a good starting point.
Less shouting, more talking, but also a willingness and a determination to make some progress, because we're the only nation in the world where this happens. And that's not the kind of value we mean when we talk about American exceptionalism, I think. David, thank you very much for joining us on Reality Check. I appreciate your insights, your expertise, and your perspective. Be well.
Thank you.